The police dog was labeled too dangerous until an 8-year-old girl sat beside his cage. Most people didn't even stop to read the tag on his kennel. The word unfit, bold, red, final. Echo had once been a hero, a decorated K9, but trauma left him broken, twitchy, silent. No tail wag, no bark, just eyes that never blinked long, until that day, when Wyatt Hartley, a retired tactical officer, showed up late to pick up meds and brought along his daughter Sienna, just 8, quiet, never quite fitting into any crowd. He told her to wait. She wandered and found him. She didn't flinch, didn't reach, just sat cross-legged near the bars. Minutes passed, and then, for the first time in months, Echo moved forward and sat down. What no handler, no behaviorist, no soldier had achieved, she did in silence. She didn't see a dangerous dog. She saw a soul just like hers. In the early morning hours, before the sun fully stretched over the tops of the pine-covered hills, Redwood Bluff looked like the kind of place people ran to when they were tired of running. Old picket fences leaned slightly but proudly. The paint on store signs faded by time more than neglect. The breeze still carried the scent of chimney smoke and damp earth, especially after rain. It was the kind of town that wore its age with quiet dignity. But beneath that peaceful facade, something had shifted. The paper mill had closed first, quietly, almost respectfully. Then the factory. Then the bank on Main Street started locking its doors earlier. A few months later, people stopped leaving their front doors unlocked. It wasn't sudden, but it was steady, like watching a bruise spread across a rib cage, slow and painful and somehow invisible to those not paying attention. Wyatt Hartley, Redwood Bluff's senior police officer, saw it all. Every empty storefront, every teenager slipping toward trouble. And he knew, better than most, that peace was not something a town kept by accident. In the heart of this town, in a modest blue-gray home nestled beneath an old cottonwood tree, lived an 8-year-old girl named Sienna. She didn't speak much, and when she did, it was often in fragments, whispered mostly to herself or to her sketchbook. The world for Sienna was a place of overwhelming noise and confusion, a swirl of texture and color and movement that didn't always make sense. Loud sounds made her cover her ears. Bright lights made her squint and retreat. Strangers made her shoulders tense and her eyes dart like a bird sensing danger. But what others called difference, her parents had learned to call depth. She noticed things people missed. A string unraveling from a sweater, the way tree shadows moved differently depending on the wind, or the sadness in someone's voice that didn't match their words. She wasn't broken, Wyatt often told himself. She was built differently, and differently didn't mean less. Rachel, Sienna's mother, was the steady one. A nurse by profession, a caregiver by instinct. Her love for Sienna was fierce, protective, and at times fearful. She tracked routines like lifelines. Breakfast at 7:30, Red Bowl only. Socks without seams. Avoidance of fluorescent lights. No unexpected touches. They'd turned their lives into a structure of softness for Sienna's sake, for their own peace. And yet there were moments, those fleeting, golden, almost accidental moments, when Sienna would laugh at something unexpectedly, or reach out, unprompted, to touch Rachel's cheek. Moments when the world aligned for her just enough to let a little light in. Wyatt lived for those moments, and feared he wasn't giving her enough of them. Their marriage, once anchored in shared ideals, had become a conversation of worries. Rachel wanted boundaries. Wyatt wanted courage. She was the wall. He wanted to open the gate. "We can't keep her in a glass box forever," he had told her last night as they washed dishes together. "She's 8, Wyatt, not 18. Her world is already loud and confusing. Why would we add risk to that?" Rachel replied, brushing a thumb across a chipped plate. "She needs to learn to walk in that world. She needs to survive it first." The conversation ended, like so many others, in silence. That morning, Sienna sat cross-legged by the window, tracing her finger over the fog on the glass. The street outside was quiet, the sky still bruised with the fading remnants of night. She pressed her ear to the cool pane, not listening for anything in particular, just feeling the stillness. In her lap was her sketch pad. On the page, a drawing of a dog. Big ears, strong eyes. Not cute exactly. Watchful. Rachel glanced at her from the kitchen. "She's been drawing that same dog again," she said softly. Wyatt sipped his coffee, eyes narrowed slightly. "She's never seen a dog like that. Not in real life," Rachel added. "No," Wyatt said quietly. "But I think maybe she needs to." The moment passed without explanation. That morning, the babysitter canceled, an unexpected flu. Wyatt was already dressed for work, badge clipped to his belt, boots laced. He'd promised to stop by the Canine Rehabilitation Center on the edge of town, an errand more emotional than procedural. There was a dog scheduled for final evaluation, a formality before euthanasia. Rachel looked at the clock. She had the early shift at the clinic. "Take her with you," she said reluctantly, handing him Sienna's coat. "But don't let her near the kennels." Wyatt nodded, but something in him already knew what was going to happen. Outside, the clouds thickened, as if in warning. Sienna stepped out onto the porch, hoodie zipped to her chin. She didn't ask questions, she rarely did, but her hand reached out, small and certain, to grasp Wyatt's finger. And just like that, father and daughter walked into a moment that neither of them could have predicted, one that would change not only their family, but the fate of a dog who'd already been written off by the world. What waited at the edge of Redwood Bluff was not just a kennel. It was the beginning of everything. The building sat at the end of a cracked asphalt road, flanked by rusted chain-link fencing and a few half-hearted pine trees. No sign marked the Canine Rehabilitation Center, just a weather-beaten mailbox and the dull hum of fluorescent lights inside. It didn't feel like a place of second chances, more like somewhere dogs were sent to be forgotten. Wyatt Hartley hadn't planned to bring Sienna here. He never did. But the babysitter had called that morning with a scratchy voice and a fever, and Rachel was already at the clinic. So he'd buckled Sienna into the back seat, handed her a juice box, and whispered a silent prayer that she'd be okay with the change in schedule. Sienna didn't protest. She never did. But she watched the road in silence, her head tilted slightly, eyes tracking the telephone poles as they passed by like sentinels. Inside the building, the scent was unmistakable bleach, rubber gloves, and the thick, anxious presence of too many dogs who didn't know why they were here. The moment they stepped through the doors, Sienna stiffened slightly. Wyatt crouched in front of her, brushing a strand of hair from her eyes. "You don't have to come far. Just stay by me, okay?" She nodded once, her small fingers wrapping tightly around the strap of her backpack. The facility manager, a wiry man named Dorsey, led them past a row of kennels. The sound of barking was chaotic, echoing through the metal corridors. Some dogs jumped up against their cages, others cowered. The air thrummed with anxiety. They stopped in front of one enclosure at the very end. The dog inside didn't bark, didn't move. His name was Ranger, Dorsey said, flipping through a clipboard. Then Echo, retired K9. He's been here a year. Failed rehab 3 times. Wyatt glanced inside. The German shepherd sat at the back of the kennel, half in shadow. His coat was still the deep black and tan of his prime, but his body looked heavier, now muscle dulled into something more still. One ear stood alert, the other had a jagged fold from an old injury. There was a scar across his shoulder, barely hidden beneath the fur. Broke protocol on multiple occasions, Dorsey added. Snapped at 2 handlers. Lunged at a vet assistant, unprovoked. Or provoked in a way you couldn't see, Wyatt murmured. Dorsey didn't answer. Wyatt signed a form, muttered a thanks, and turned to check on Sienna, but she was gone. Panic flickered. He moved back down the corridor quickly, scanning. The barking rose again, agitated now, louder. And then he saw her. She was sitting cross-legged on the concrete floor at the far end of the kennel row, in front of a cage that hadn't been cleaned yet. The bowl of untouched food sat inside, growing cold. Inside the kennel, Echo sat perfectly still. His eyes were locked on her. He didn't growl, didn't twitch, didn't bark like the others. He simply watched. And Sienna? She didn't flinch. Her little hands rested on her knees. Her shoes-worn sneakers with faded stars were tucked neatly beneath her. She stared back at him, calm and curious, not with the wide-eyed awe of a child looking at a dog, but with the quiet reverence of one wounded soul recognizing another. Wyatt didn't move. Something in the air had shifted, too fragile to interrupt. Then Sienna spoke. Her voice was quiet, not afraid, just sure. "He's not dangerous," she said, not turning her head. Wyatt blinked. "Baby, that dog has been through a lot." "So have I," she replied. Echo inched forward inside the cage, slow and deliberate. Not in a stalk, but in something softer, his body low, his posture non-threatening. "He's not angry," Sienna continued, her eyes still fixed on the shepherd. "He's just broken. That's different." There was a long pause. Wyatt stepped closer. "How do you know that?" "I saw it," she said, finally looking up at her father. "In his eyes." Echo stopped just at the gate. The 2 of them, child and dog, sat facing each other, inches of metal between them. But it felt like the bars were a formality, a temporary misunderstanding. There was a kind of stillness between them that seemed impossible inside a room like this. Wyatt crouched beside his daughter, heart heavy in his chest. "Sienna, sweetheart, I don't know if we can help him." She blinked slowly. "No one's tried," she said. Dorsey had approached by now, arms folded. "I don't get it. That dog's never acted like this, not with me, not with anyone." "He doesn't like noise," Sienna said, without being asked. "Or sudden things, or people who expect him to be a weapon again." Wyatt stared at her. Sienna turned back to Echo. "You don't have to do that anymore," she whispered. "You don't have to hurt for people to think you're strong." The dog sat down, a quiet, deliberate motion. His eyes never left hers, and just like that, something passed between them, something that couldn't be measured or explained, but was felt deep in the marrow of everyone who stood watching. That evening, Wyatt stood at the threshold of their living room, watching as Echo, now clean, fed, and hesitant, took his first steps into their home. Rachel's arms were folded, lips pursed. She didn't speak. Not yet. Sienna stood beside the doorway, her hand outstretched, not reaching to grab, but simply offering. Echo passed Wyatt, past Rachel, and stopped just beside Sienna. She touched his fur. He didn't flinch. He sat down. And the house, somehow, felt different, like it had just gained a second heartbeat. "Wyatt, this is a bad idea," Dorsey muttered, his tone lower now, like he was trying to talk a friend down from a ledge. "You saw the chart. Failed the first behavior eval at 3 months, lunged at a handler during grooming, froze on leash in traffic simulation. The man won't even take food from most people." Wyatt stood in the narrow office, arms crossed, eyes locked on the scratched-up clipboard. Echo's profile photo stared back blank-eyed, stoic, like a dog that had learned long ago to feel nothing because feeling got him nowhere. Underneath, the behavior notes read like red flags on a shooting range. But Wyatt didn't see danger, he saw a survivor. "Let me ask you something," Wyatt said finally, voice calm but anchored in something deeper. "How many of these tests were done with children present?" Dorsey blinked. "None." "Then maybe you tested the wrong thing." Dorsey exhaled hard and leaned back against the filing cabinet. "He's scheduled for termination in 5 days, Wyatt. The review board's been clear. He doesn't pass, he doesn't stay." "Then he's not staying," Wyatt said. "He's coming home." A pause. "You're not authorized for adoption. That's not protocol. I'm not doing this under protocol." And just like that, the paper trail ended. The car ride home was quiet, but not heavy. Echo lay in the back seat, not curled in stress, but stretched out, chin resting on the edge of Sienna's car seat. She didn't say anything, didn't pet him. She just sat, her eyes forward, her tiny hand dangling off the edge of the cushion so her fingers could occasionally brush the fur along his neck. Every time they touched, he blinked. Not flinched, not startled. Blink, settle, accept. Wyatt drove without speaking, his mind running ahead of the road. He knew what was waiting at home, and he was right. Rachel stood in the doorway, arms folded, her scrubs still faintly smelling of antiseptic and coffee. Her eyes went first to the back of the SUV, where Echo sat upright, tail still, gaze fixed on her like a question. Then to Wyatt. Then to Sienna, who held her father's hand like it was the most natural thing in the world. "You brought him here," she said flatly. Wyatt nodded. "I didn't plan to." "But you did." "Rach." She stepped aside to let them in, but her body language didn't move with her. Inside the house, the warmth of late afternoon filtered through the curtains, golden and soft. The kind of light that usually made things feel safe. Not tonight. Sienna walked ahead, tugging lightly on Echo's leash. The shepherd moved slow, alert, but not stiff. He sniffed the carpet, the wall, the air. He didn't growl, he didn't pace, he simply followed her inside. "I read his file," Rachel said from behind, keeping her voice low as Sienna led Echo down the hallway toward the guest room. "I know what he's done." "You saw those incident reports?" Wyatt nodded. "I also saw how he looked at her." "You mean the dog that bit a vet assistant on the shoulder?" "He didn't bite Sienna." "She's not a test, Wyatt. I'm not treating her like one. She's fragile. She's intuitive." Rachel's eyes were tired, not angry. That made it worse somehow. "She's a little girl," she said finally. "And that is a military dog with trauma." "And so is she," Wyatt said, softer than she expected. "He just doesn't scream when it hurts." That silenced them both. Later that night, the house had settled into an uneasy quiet. Sienna was curled on the floor in the guest room, her coloring book spread out like a fan around her. Echo lay beside her, not touching but close, watching. Rachel stood in the hallway, arms tucked into her chest. "He hasn't moved from that spot," she murmured. "He won't," Wyatt replied, "unless she does." Sienna said something in a half-whisper. It wasn't a word Wyatt could make out, but Echo responded not with a bark, not even a tail wag. He blinked, lowered his head to the floor, matched his breathing to hers. Wyatt felt something press against the edges of his chest, something like awe, but gentler, sadder. It was the same feeling he had the first time Sienna looked him in the eyes and smiled without being prompted, like watching a star flicker into life in a sky you thought was empty. "I'll sleep in the hallway," Rachel said after a pause, "in case something happens." Wyatt nodded. He didn't try to argue, but nothing happened. Not that night. Not the next. It was sometime around midnight when the final unspoken test came. A thunderstorm rolled in, fast, unexpected. Wind battered the windows. The first crack of lightning turned the house white for an instant. Wyatt bolted upright in bed. Rachel was already at the door. But before they could reach the hallway, they stopped. Sienna hadn't screamed. She hadn't run. They found her sitting inside the guest room closet, the door cracked just enough for one beam of light to stretch through. And there, lying just outside the door, Echo, unmoving, steady, like a sentinel. Wyatt knelt slowly. Sienna's voice was almost too soft to hear. "He keeps the loud things away." Wyatt felt something sharp tighten behind his ribs. Rachel didn't speak. She just walked to the hallway linen closet, pulled out a blanket, and placed it gently over the dog. In the morning, Rachel sat at the kitchen table, sipping tea with both hands. "He stays," she said. Wyatt looked up, surprised. "He stays," she repeated, "but we do this right. Behaviorist, vet, reintegration protocol, everything." "Deal," Wyatt said. And as if on cue, Echo padded quietly into the kitchen, Sienna trailing behind him with bedhead and her blanket dragging across the tile. She leaned forward, fingers brushing lightly through his fur as she passed. He didn't flinch. And somewhere in the quiet that followed, the Hartley family found its fourth member, one who didn't speak, but had already said everything that needed to be said. At first it was subtle. Echo didn't bark, he didn't whine, he didn't seek attention the way other dogs did. But wherever Sienna Hartley went, Echo followed. Not like a puppy chasing noise, but like a guardian bound by some silent code, a shadow made of muscle and fur, anchored by duty he could no longer name but still recognized in her small, steady steps. If Sienna curled up on the porch swing with a book, Echo laid beneath it, ears up, watching the street. If she disappeared behind the curtains in her room to escape the world's brightness, Echo sat outside the door and waited. When she colored, he would position himself just close enough that his tail occasionally brushed her ankle like a reassurance. "Still here, still yours." It wasn't long before Rachel started calling him her gravity. Because even on her most disoriented days, when the sun felt too sharp or her clothes itched wrong or she couldn't find the words, Sienna never drifted far from Echo. The first test came 3 weeks after Echo's arrival. A meltdown, the kind that came unannounced, like a thunderclap inside her brain. The trigger was small. A substitute therapist had brought a different brand of tactile cards. They smelled different, felt different, wrong. Sienna's breathing had turned rapid, her body stiff. She collapsed in the corner of the therapy room, arms wrapped around her knees, fingernails digging into her own skin. Wyatt had been about to intervene when the therapist held up a hand. "Wait." Echo, who had been sitting quietly by the corner window, rose and walked forward. No command, no signal. He laid down beside her, not touching, just there. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, he began to breathe. Deep, slow, measured. Inhale, exhale. Again. Again. Sienna's fingers loosened. Her shoulders stopped quaking. Her breaths began to match his. And then came the smallest, most extraordinary thing. She leaned over and laid her hand on his chest. "Breathe," she whispered. After that, he was no longer a guest in her routines. He was the pattern her days formed around. When the world became too much a too loud hallway, a surprise visitor, a new food on the plate, it was Echo who held the storm. He didn't stop the chaos. He simply refused to leave her in it. Wyatt watched it unfold with awe. Not because he didn't expect the dog to help, he'd hoped that much, but because Echo never needed instruction. It was instinct, recognition, two injured souls learning how to heal side by side. At school, accommodations were already in place for Sienna. Noise-canceling headphones, a sensory pod in the corner of the classroom, a laminated communication board with options like "Quiet, please" and "I need break." But the day Echo joined her in class as a certified emotional support companion, everything changed. He lay under her desk like a shadow given weight, his eyes scanning the room as if reading the intentions of every pencil scratch and shoe squeak. Other kids noticed, of course. "Is he a police dog?" one boy asked at recess. "No," Sienna said quietly, eyes not leaving Echo. The boy tilted his head. "He looks serious." Sienna paused. Then, with a small smile, she replied, "He is." At home, she started talking more, not in full sentences and never loud, but in ways Rachel and Wyatt hadn't heard in years. "Echo, sit. Stay here, okay? Good boy." Simple phrases, but they felt like tectonic shifts. One afternoon, Rachel found Sienna on the living room rug, reading aloud in soft, halting cadence from her favorite book, The Very Quiet Cricket. Echo lay beside her, tail twitching every time she paused, as if encouraging her to continue. Rachel stood in the doorway, hand over her mouth. She didn't cry, but she would remember that moment for the rest of her life. And sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn, Wyatt would wake to the sound of soft padding paws in the hallway, followed by the faint creak of Sienna's door. He wouldn't get up, wouldn't check. He knew exactly what it was. Echo, doing what no nightlight or lullaby ever could, being there. One day, while organizing the old storage boxes in the garage, Wyatt found Echo's original service vest, creased, faded, its canine patch scratched, but intact. The smell of old adrenaline still clung to the fabric. He brought it inside, unsure what to do with it. When Sienna saw it, her eyes widened. She walked over, touched the edge of the vest gently. Echo sniffed it, then sat down beside her. "He wore this when he had to fight," she said. Wyatt nodded. "Yeah, before we knew him." She turned to Echo. "You don't have to wear it anymore." He blinked once, then licked her hand. In that home, Echo was never trained to save her, but he did over and over in 1,000 quiet ways, with stillness, with breath, with presence. And the little girl who once couldn't say more than 3 words to a stranger now walked into therapy with her hand resting on the back of a retired war dog, her voice low but steady. "We're ready." There was a rhythm to it now, not the kind that came from clocks or alarms, but the quiet cadence of a life slowly realigning itself. Each morning, as the sun crept over the ridgeline and the fog still clung low across Redwood Bluff streets, the Hartley house stirred in a new sequence of motion. Rachel brewed coffee. Wyatt read the blotter report. And Sienna, hair still tangled from sleep, would wander into the kitchen without a word, her hand already reaching toward the thick fur of the German shepherd, walking silently at her side. Echo was always there first. He lay outside her door before she woke. He waited as she brushed her teeth, paws tucked under him, eyes half-lidded. He padded quietly behind her down the hallway, matching the exact rhythm of her bare feet against the hardwood floor. 1 step, 2. Pause. Adjust. Walk. If she hesitated before reaching the fridge, too many choices, too many textures, Echo would press his shoulder gently into her leg. Just enough weight to remind her, "You're not alone." Breakfast was always in the red bowl. Echo didn't beg. He just watched. At 8:10 a.m. they walked out the front door together. Sienna in her light blue hoodie, her therapy bag slung diagonally across her chest. Echo at her left side, not tethered by leash but by habit, trust. Some mornings, Wyatt drove them. Other times, when the weather was steady and traffic light, they walked. Echo knew to stop at every crosswalk, to glance both ways before nudging her gently forward, to keep himself between her and the street, even when she didn't notice. To the casual observer, it looked like a child walking her dog to school. But to anyone who truly saw it was a soldier walking his person into battle. And every morning, the battlefield looked different. Loud cafeterias, fluorescent lights, social expectations wrapped in bright paper. Inside the school building, Echo had his designated spot in the classroom beneath Sienna's desk, his chin on his paws, his eyes tracking every movement within a 15-foot radius. Teachers adapted. Students grew used to the new normal. The silence Echo brought with him became part of the atmosphere, a stillness that was protective, not passive. If Sienna began to stim too hard rocking tapping, going into sensory shutdown, Echo would lift his head, place it in her lap. Nothing more. And most days, that was enough. Tuesdays and Thursdays were therapy days. The Occupational Therapy Center was bright and clinical, the kind of place designed with good intentions but unforgiving lighting. Sienna didn't love it, but Echo made it bearable. Inside the padded room, where her therapist encouraged motor skill practice through weighted blankets and coordination games, Echo would lie on the crash mat, watching patiently. When it came time for pressure therapy, Sienna no longer needed the compression vest. She needed him. Echo would stand beside her, letting her lean her body against his frame, absorbing every ounce of her tension without flinching. She'd whisper into his fur not words, but vibrations of comfort. On harder days, she didn't speak at all, and he didn't need her to. For Wyatt, it was harder, because while everyone else saw the miracle, saw the healing, he still saw the scars. He saw them when Echo flinched at the sound of metal against concrete. He saw them when the dog froze at the pop of a car backfiring downtown. He saw them when Echo, even in his calmest moments, never truly rested ears still half-tuned to threats long since past. And in those moments, Wyatt didn't see his daughter's companion. He saw Officer Calder's partner. The memories came back in fragments, never asked for, but always vivid. flash back. Calder standing on the training field, one hand on Echo's harness, the other holding the clipboard. "This one's different," he had told Wyatt. "His drive is off the charts, but he's got empathy, if you can believe it. He reads the room before he charges in." Wyatt remembered watching Echo during those early canine drills. Flawless tracking, unshakable in the face of distraction. But when a child-sized dummy was placed beside a training suspect, Echo's aggression shifted instantly into protection. He blocked the child with his body instead of engaging the threat. "He knows who deserves his teeth," Calder had joked. They'd laughed back then, before the raid, before everything went wrong. Now, Echo walked the length of the hallway each night, stopping at every bedroom door before returning to Sienna's room. Wyatt watched it once from the stairs, unseen. Echo paused at his door. Just a moment, then moved on. It felt like guilt, but not Echo's. His own. Because Wyatt had once filed the paperwork to confirm Echo's discharge. He had read the word unfit and hadn't asked enough questions. He had been too busy grieving Calder to see that the dog left behind had been grieving too. One evening, while organizing paperwork at the kitchen table, Wyatt looked up and saw Sienna asleep on the couch. Echo lay beside her, her small hand resting on his back like a stone placed on sacred ground. Rachel walked in and stood silently beside him. "She talks more now," she whispered. "I know," Wyatt said. "She eats better, calms down faster." He nodded. Rachel looked at him then. "So, why do you still look like you're waiting for the other shoe to drop?" Wyatt didn't answer. He just looked at Echo and saw both a hero and the fallout. In time, the routine became not just familiar, but essential. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were becoming something new. A unit. A family that pulsed in a rhythm of quiet footsteps, soft commands, and loyalty deeper than blood. And as Wyatt watched his daughter fall asleep each night, her fingers curled in the fur of a dog who had seen too much and still chosen to stay, he knew there was no going back, only forward, one quiet day at a time. It was a Wednesday evening when Wyatt handed her the whistle. Not wrapped, not announced, just placed softly on the kitchen table beside her glass of milk and Echo's paw print placemat. A small silver cylinder, unassuming, no bigger than her pinky. It caught the light like moonlight on water. Sienna looked at it, then looked at him. No questions, just curiosity, quiet and open. Wyatt waited a beat, then said, "It's for when words don't work." She nodded slowly. That night, after Rachel had gone to bed and the house had slipped into its gentle hush, Wyatt sat with Sienna in the living room. Echo lay between them, tail curled, his breathing a steady rhythm. Wyatt turned the whistle over in his fingers, the metal cool against his calloused palm. "This isn't a toy," he said gently. "It's a call, an emergency signal. You only use it when you need help fast and you can't say it out loud." Sienna's gaze stayed on the whistle. Her thumb traced its edge, eyes narrowed in thought. "Will Echo know?" Wyatt smiled just faintly. "He'll know before the sound even finishes." He paused, then added, "It was part of his original training. Back when he was still—" He trailed off. Still a soldier, still someone else's, still haunted. But Sienna didn't need the rest of the sentence. She just reached forward, plucked the whistle from his hand, and cradled it in both palms like a seedling. For the next week, they practiced. In the backyard, on the porch, beside the garden where Rachel grew rosemary, and wild time. Wyatt would nod at her. No words, just the signal. And Sienna would raise the whistle, press it to her lips, and blow softly, but with intention. The sound was sharp but clean, not shrill, just urgent. Echo would snap to attention immediately, ears perked, body low and ready, not aggressive, just aware. Then he'd move, fast, smooth, controlled, to Sienna's side, to her defense, to her heart. Once, Wyatt tested her resolve. He called her from across the house, using a tone she didn't like. Too loud, too sudden. She froze in the hallway, her shoulders tensing, eyes darting to the corners like the walls had shifted. Rachel moved to intervene, but Wyatt held out his arm. "Let's see," he said. Sienna reached into her hoodie pocket, pulled out the whistle. Blew. One sharp note. Echo was up before the sound faded. He rounded the corner, wedged himself between Sienna and the hallway shadows. Not threatening, not barking, just there. And that was enough. Wyatt knelt, heart a strange mess of pride and guilt. "You did good," he told her. She didn't speak, but she touched Echo's ear, then tucked the whistle back into her pocket with the reverence of someone placing a holy object into a temple. In time, the whistle became more than a signal. It became a symbol, a promise, that when her voice failed her, when her senses spun sideways, or the world came in too fast, she still had power. She still had a way to call for help, and help would come with teeth and loyalty and 4 steady paws. One afternoon, Sienna sat at the table drawing. Echo rested beneath her, and Wyatt watched from the doorway, arms crossed, unnoticed. Her hand moved slowly, pencil darkening the curves of a figure. It was a triangle. One point was a child, one was a dog, one a man in uniform. In the center she wrote, "We all listen." Wyatt felt something shift in his chest. Not pain, not sadness, something quieter. Forgiveness, maybe. For himself. For Echo. For not trusting. Sooner. That evening, Wyatt walked outside with Echo. The stars were coming out slow, lazy. The air smelled like pine and possibility. He crouched next to the dog, resting his hand on the thick fur behind Echo's neck. "She's got it now," he said. Echo didn't move. "You did that," Wyatt added. "You gave her safety, voice, control." A pause. "She gave that back to you too, didn't she?" Echo blinked, slow and sure, then stood, turning toward the door without waiting for a command. Wyatt followed. Inside, Sienna was asleep on the couch, the whistle curled in her palm like a secret. And in that moment, Wyatt understood. This wasn't just about danger. It was about connection, about belief, about knowing with utter certainty that someone would come when called, and that maybe, just maybe, this strange, bruised little triangle they'd built was stronger than anything he'd ever known. The engines didn't roar, they purred, low, deep, and steady like something coiled in the dark, waiting. On the winding asphalt that cut through the wooded hills outside Redwood Bluff, 5 motorcycles moved in single file, their matte black frames blending with the dusk. No chrome, no noise, no flash. Just precision. Locals had stopped calling them a biker gang. That made them sound too loud, too drunk, too reckless. No, these men were something colder, more methodical. And they didn't ride for attention. They rode for control. They called themselves the Hollow Ridge Pact, though no one ever said it aloud in town. because saying a name like that gave it power. And Clayton Briggs didn't need any more than he already had. He rode at the front, broad-shouldered, back straight, face half hidden beneath a highway patrol helmet he no longer had the right to wear. Briggs was the kind of man who didn't need to bark orders. He just looked at you, and people moved. Muscle memory, years of command baked into his posture, even if the badge had been ripped from his chest over a decade ago. Dishonorable discharge, police brutality investigation, then vanished until now. He came back with scars, both seen and unseen. One carved across his jawline like a whip crack. Another twisted around his wrist like a reminder of the day he stopped following rules and started writing his own. Clayton Briggs wasn't just dangerous. He was calculated. And Redwood Bluff? It was the perfect town for quiet conquest. Small, scared, hollowed out by layoffs and loss, and an underfunded police department that now ran on grit and prayers. No one wanted to believe that something evil could creep in quietly. But it had. It started slow, a few missing shipments, untraceable cash flowing into closed-down motels. People showing up at the local clinic with track marks they swore were from an old injury. A girl found unconscious behind the gas station, her pockets filled with pills that weren't hers. Then came the accidental fire at the old train depot. No charges, no suspects. Then a warning. A single severed dog tag mailed anonymously to the Redwood Bluff Sheriff's Department. Wyatt Hartley knew exactly who it belonged to. Briggs wasn't just infiltrating the town, he was taunting it. And worse, he was doing it like a man who had already rehearsed every outcome. Like he had the playbook and everyone else was reading from the wrong script. Wyatt had tried to explain it at a town hall once, said they were dealing with something organized, military-born, tactical. But the mayor had brushed it off. Just some glorified drifters, she'd said. They'll tire of our little town. They wouldn't, because Briggs didn't pick places at random. He picked them like he picked targets, slow, deliberate, and deeply personal. It was personal with Wyatt, too. They'd served on the same task force once, years ago. Different uniforms, same dirt. Wyatt had followed protocol. Briggs had rewritten it. One believed in accountability, the other in force. Their partnership had ended in a courtroom. And when Briggs walked out those doors stripped of his badge, it wasn't shame he wore. It was vengeance. Now, 10 years later, the past rode back into Wyatt's life on the back of a steel machine with no license plate. Only this time Briggs didn't wear a badge. He wore control. Control of Hollow Ridge's back roads. Control of the border supply lines. Control of a fear that bloomed slowly in the cracks of Redwood Bluff. And now, bit by bit, he was extending that fear, like smoke creeping under a locked door. On Main Street, folks started closing early. The bakery turned off its neon lights at dusk. The librarian stopped shelving after dark. And Wyatt began noticing the same unfamiliar faces parked outside the clinic, the hardware store, the school fence. Always watching, never approaching, always smiling with that kind of smile that meant nothing good. Echo didn't like it either. Every time one of the pack's members rode past their street, the dog stiffened, not barked, just listened with his whole body. Head low, tail frozen, nose twitching. He recognized something Wyatt did too, something from war zones and failed raids and parking garages full of lies. Predators who knew how to play civil. Late one night, Wyatt stood on his front porch, arms crossed, watching the road curve into darkness. He felt the vibration before he saw it, the hum of tires slicing through asphalt like memory, and then headlights, and then silence. A lone motorcycle paused at the stop sign across the street. The rider didn't turn, didn't move, just sat there, watching, helmet on, engine idling. Echo stepped out from the shadows of the porch, head forward, gaze fixed. Wyatt didn't move. Neither did Briggs, because Wyatt knew it was him. You didn't need to see the face to feel the weight of unfinished war, and just like that, the bike turned, disappeared down the street. No rev, no wheel spin, just silent swallowing threat like a slow breath. Inside, Rachel asked, "Was that him?" Wyatt nodded. She didn't ask more. And in the living room, Sienna drew a dark figure standing alone on a hill, one hand on a leash, the other holding something sharp. They had been warned. And the ghosts of Hollow Ridge had returned, not in smoke, not in fire, but in quiet thunder, and they were here to finish what they started. It was just past 7:00 p.m. when Rachel stepped outside the clinic. The fluorescent lights buzzed behind her, casting a pale glow over the parking lot. The sky was already turning that peculiar shade of burnt orange and violet that only Redwood Bluff seemed to know how to wear. She tucked her stethoscope into her shoulder bag, exhaled, and rolled her neck out of habit. A long day, too, fractured wrists, a chest cold no med seemed to touch, and a teenager who'd refused to speak unless she could pet Echo. But something was off. A feeling she couldn't name, just static in the air. Rachel paused at the curb, her keys clenched tighter in her fist. And then she saw him. He was leaning against a Dodge Charger parked near the edge of the lot, tan leather jacket, shaved head, cigarette balanced on his lip like he wasn't in a no-smoking zone, one boot on the ground, the other resting on the bumper, just standing there, not waiting for anyone, not doing anything, watching. At first, Rachel thought maybe he was someone's ride, a boyfriend, an impatient Uber, a burnout from Hollow Ridge. But then he looked up and smiled. It wasn't friendly. It wasn't curious. It was that kind of slow, wolfish grin that said, "I know something you don't, and I like that you don't know it yet." Rachel's spine prickled. She didn't wave, didn't flinch, just walked to her car, calm, controlled, the way Wyatt had taught her during those old late-night what-if drills when Echo first moved in. But the entire time, she felt it. That gaze, sharp as a scalpel, cold as a blade against the throat. She didn't tell anyone at first. Not when she got home, not over dinner. Not while Wyatt read Sienna her bedtime story and Echo lay curled beneath the window with one ear perked. But later that night, as they stood side by side brushing their teeth, Rachel said, it quiet, like a question, "Do you know anyone with a tan leather jacket and a Charger with no plates?" Wyatt glanced up in the mirror, toothbrush paused. "Why?" "He was in the clinic lot, just standing there, watching." Wyatt shrugged, rinsed, spit. "Could be nothing. We've had strangers pass through before." Rachel turned to him. "He smiled at me, Wyatt, like he knew me." "That doesn't mean—" "I'm telling you, it wasn't normal." Wyatt exhaled. "You're thinking it's one of Briggs's guys." "I know it was." His jaw tightened. The mirror caught the flicker of something harder behind his eyes. Still, he shook his head. "I'll drive by the clinic tomorrow. Maybe it's a fluke." But Rachel could tell he didn't believe that. Not yet. The next morning, Wyatt got the call. Not from a deputy, not from a neighbor, but from Jared Pierce. An old name, An older story. Once a Marine, now a man barely surviving between shifts at the sawmill and sessions at the VA. Wyatt found him parked outside the old diner on Hillside Avenue, inside a rusty pickup that looked like it ran on prayers and duct tape. Jared didn't bother with hellos, just looked up, eyes haunted. "They're watching you." Wyatt blinked. "Excuse me?" "The men with Briggs. I saw two of them talking near the loading dock at the mill. Mentioned your name. Called you the quiet one with the dog." He paused. "They're not just passing through, Wyatt. They've picked this town." Wyatt leaned on the doorframe of the truck. His hand, unconsciously, went to the badge on his belt. "What else did you hear?" Jared shook his head. "Not much, just the way they said it. Like this was a game to them. Like they already knew how it ends." Wyatt's face stayed unreadable, but something behind his eyes dimmed. "I thought you should know," Jared added, softer this time. "Before it's not just you they're watching." That night, Wyatt sat on the porch alone. Rachel had already gone to bed, her hand still clenched around the pepper spray she now carried to work. Inside, Sienna slept under a blanket of stars taped to her ceiling. Echo lay at the foot of her bed, head lifted every few minutes like even his dreams couldn't ignore what was creeping outside. Wyatt stared down the driveway, the moonlight silvering the asphalt. He felt it now, the shift, the tilt in the air, the way Redwood Bluff had gone quiet. Not peaceful, but silent, like it was holding its breath. He finally whispered into the dark, "What do you want, Briggs?" And from somewhere beyond the trees, he thought he heard it. The distant growl of a motorcycle engine. The clink of silverware against porcelain was the only sound in the room. Sienna sat at the corner of the kitchen table, knees tucked up on her chair, her plate untouched. A blank sheet of paper was spread in front of her, and in her right hand she held a green crayon not drawing yet, just pressing it into the paper like she was trying to feel something through it. Echo lay beneath the table, his massive head resting between his paws, but his eyes were open, watching, waiting. Rachel stood by the stove, arms crossed, her dinner gone cold. Wyatt was at the head of the table, still in uniform, holster hung over the chair behind him. The tension wasn't loud. It was measured, the kind that doesn't scream, but presses. "We agreed," Rachel said quietly, folding her arms tighter. "You'd tell me before involving her in anything even remotely dangerous." "She wasn't involved in anything," Wyatt replied, tone even. "She was just outside practicing with the whistle. Echo was right there." Rachel's voice sharpened. "That man yesterday, the one near the clinic, he was watching me. You said it was probably nothing." "Now Jared says they're watching you. Don't pretend this isn't escalating." Wyatt leaned back, jaw tightening. "I'm not pretending anything. I'm handling it." "No," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "You're preparing for it. That's different." Sienna still hadn't moved. The green crayon was tracing lazy loops, now circles that never closed. She glanced at her father, then at her mother, then down at Echo, and began to draw. "I just want her to be able to walk outside without a tale of anxiety behind her," Wyatt said, softer now. "Is that so wrong?" Rachel shook her head, eyes wet, but not yet broken. "No, Wyatt. Wanting it isn't wrong, but assuming it's safe is." There was a beat of silence. "She's 8. I know. She doesn't know what danger looks like." Wyatt looked over at their daughter. Sienna's tongue was peeking out the corner of her mouth in concentration now. She was sketching Echo with a precision that always startled them both. The curve of his jaw, the fur above his eyes, the collar he wore like a soldier's badge. "She knows what Echo looks like," Wyatt murmured. Rachel turned toward him, voice brittle. "That's not the same." He stood slowly, crossing the room to lean against the counter near her. "She has him," he said. "And maybe that's the only reason she's even opening up again. She blows the whistle, he comes. Every time, no questions, no hesitation." Rachel looked down at her hands. "And if one day he can't come fast enough?" Wyatt paused. Then quietly, "Then at least we gave her something that made her believe she wasn't alone." A low hum came from the table. Rachel turned. Sienna was humming soft under her breath. Not a song, more like a vibration. Echo lifted his head. Rachel crossed the room slowly and knelt beside her daughter. Sienna held up the paper. Echo, drawn in soft green and gray strokes, stood beside a small girl in a hoodie. The girl held a whistle in one hand and in the other, a star. Rachel's breath caught. "What's this?" she asked. Sienna's answer was a whisper. "It means he sees, even when I don't." Wyatt knelt too on the other side of the table. He touched the corner of the drawing just lightly. "Is that the whistle?" Sienna nodded. "And the star?" She looked at him, expression unreadable. "It's the place where he hears things first." Silence. Rachel reached up and tucked a strand of Sienna's hair behind her ear, then stood. She looked at Wyatt again, tired but not angry now, just scared. "I want her to have independence," she said. "But I want her to survive it too." Wyatt gave a small nod. "So do I." He looked back at Sienna, who had resumed coloring Echo's ears. "We can't protect her from the world forever," he said, voice low but certain. Then, with one hand resting on Echo's head, "But Echo can." That night, after the dishes were done and the lights had dimmed, Rachel sat on the edge of the bed while Wyatt changed out of his uniform. She turned to him. "If it comes to it," she asked, "will you leave the department?" Wyatt didn't answer right away. Then he turned off the lamp and lay down beside her. "Only if staying means losing her." Echo, as if summoned by the words, padded down the hallway and settled at the threshold of Sienna's room, silent, alert, watching, always watching. The sun had only just broken over the rooftops of Redwood Bluff, bathing Maple Street in a warm, golden hush. Everything felt clean, quiet, and slow-like. The town was still rubbing sleep from its eyes. From the front porch of the Hartley home, Wyatt sipped his coffee and watched his daughter tie the last loop in her shoelace with focused precision. She wore her favorite red hoodie, the sleeves too long and thumb holes frayed. Her fingers worked quickly but without rush, the way only someone who had done something 100 times does it, with intent, not flair. Echo stood beside her, a silent sentinel. His tail didn't wag. His posture was alert, not stiff attentive, not aggressive. A working dog with a new purpose. Sienna straightened, pulled the hoodie over her head, and adjusted the small canvas bag slung over one shoulder. Inside, $5, a list written in her shaky handwriting. Milk, eggs, strawberries, if not mushy, and her emergency whistle. She glanced at Wyatt. He didn't say anything, just nodded once. Behind him, Rachel leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed tight over her chest. Her eyes were fixed not on Sienna, but on her husband. "You're really going to let her go?" she whispered, low enough not to reach Sienna's ears. "She's ready," Wyatt murmured. Rachel's jaw clenched. "She's 8. Wyatt didn't look away from their daughter. And she's 8 with Echo. It had started with baby steps, walking to the mailbox, then to the neighbor's garden and back, then halfway down the block with Echo glued to her side like a shadow stitched to her heels. Today was a mile-round trip, Maple Street to the corner market and back. Sienna reached into her pocket and patted the whistle once, a small motion, ritualistic now. Echo's ears twitched, and then, without a word, they started walking. Wyatt didn't sit down. He leaned against the porch beam, watching their figures grow smaller with each step. Echo's head moved left to right every few seconds, scanning, alert, purposeful. Rachel stepped out and handed him a second cup of coffee. He took it, but his eyes didn't move. "I don't think I can do this," she said softly. "You don't have to," he answered. "She is." Rachel shook her head, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "You know what scares me more than the world?" He looked at her, finally. "What?" "The idea that I'll stop fearing it. That one day I'll believe she's completely safe, and I'll be wrong." Wyatt swallowed, jaw tight, then said quietly, "I used to think safety meant holding on. But maybe, for her, it means being trusted." Down the street, Sienna crossed the first intersection with slow, measured steps. She paused at the corner, waiting, just like she and Echo had practiced. He sat, looking both ways. When she saw him shift forward, she stepped off the curb. A jogger passed them and waved. Sienna didn't wave back, but her fingers tapped twice against Echo's collar. He didn't respond with noise, just nudged her hand gently. That was enough. The market was small family mart, with the faded yellow awning and dusty postcard stand out front. Sienna walked in, Echo at her side. The bell above the door jingled. Behind the counter, Mrs. Delgado smiled as soon as she saw them. "Morning, sweetheart," she said. "Got your list today?" Sienna nodded and held it up. Echo stayed seated by the door, never straying. Mrs. Delgado tilted her head. "And Echo?" Sienna finally spoke, just one word. "Guard." Back on the porch, Wyatt checked his watch. 10 minutes. "She's almost there," he said. Rachel's hands twisted in her sleeves. "You trained Echo for raids, for tactical work, but he's not infallible." "No, he's not," Wyatt agreed. "But Sienna doesn't need a tank. She needs a partner, and he is that, more than anyone else." Rachel stared down the street like her gaze could leap over rooftops. "She's still so small," she whispered. "She's getting bigger." Sienna returned 5 minutes later, a half-gallon of milk clutched against her side like treasure, and a small paper bag swinging from her wrist. Echo trotted ahead of her, slightly now more relaxed, sensing home. She reached the gate, opened it without help, and walked up the steps, Echo climbing right beside her. Wyatt met her halfway. "Well?" he asked, eyes flicking down to the milk. "Still cold?" She nodded, then reached into the paper bag and pulled out a single, slightly bruised strawberry. She held it up. "For Echo." The shepherd sniffed, licked her palm once and sat. Rachel came to the door then, her face unreadable. Sienna looked at her. No smile, no words, just a quiet certainty in her posture. "I remembered the change," she said finally, and handed it to her mother. Inside, the kitchen light glowed warm. The milk went into the fridge. The whistle stayed in her hoodie pocket. And Echo, ever watchful, curled up beneath her chair head on paws, eyes fixed toward the door. The world hadn't gotten safer, but today it had been trusted. The milk in Sienna's bag swayed rhythmically with each step, brushing against her hip. Maple Street was quieter now than it had been earlier, though the sun had climbed higher, casting sharp lines of shadow between the houses. Echo padded beside her, ears flicking with every sound, paws silent against the cracked sidewalk. They were halfway home. Sienna had just reached the point where the road curved near the old railway underpass, where houses thinned and the trees grew denser. She didn't like this part too many echoes, too many textures all at once. Gravel underfoot, the sting of sunlight bouncing off car windows, the sudden hum of far-off engines. Echo slowed, nose twitching. A growl, almost imperceptible, built low in his throat. Then, the sound struck like a thunderclap. Engines. 1, 2. Then more. Sienna flinched, hands pressing to her ears. From behind the bend, 5 motorcycles emerged in staggered formation, their engines snarling like beasts. Black leather, tinted visors, chrome glinting. Echo moved in front of her instantly, body tense, tail low, legs braced wide. He didn't bark, he didn't lunge. He simply stood his ground. The bikes slowed, they circled. One peeled off to block the path forward. Another rumbled in behind them, hemming them in. A voice, thick with gravel and control, echoed from the lead bike. "Well now, what have we here?" Sienna's hands were still pressed tightly to her ears. She dropped her bag. The milk carton rolled away unnoticed. The man stepped off his bike. His boots hit the pavement like punctuation marks. He removed his helmet slowly, deliberately. Underneath, a face marked by years of grit and fury. One eye clouded by an old injury. A long scar trailed down his cheek. Clayton Briggs. He took a step forward, eyes settling on Sienna. "I know you," he said, squinting. "You're Wyatt Hartley's little girl." Sienna's breathing hitched. Her body swayed slightly from the sensory shock, the roar of engines, the vibration in the soles of her shoes, the overwhelming scent of oil, leather, and heat. Echo moved closer, so close she could feel the warmth of his body against her side. Briggs's smile was thin, cruel. "Heard your daddy's been busy stirring pots he shouldn't. Thought we'd say hello." He raised a gloved hand. 2 of the bikers behind revved their engines, short, sharp bursts that shattered the air. Sienna dropped to her knees, eyes squeezing shut. Echo's body shifted. It was no longer the posture of a house dog or a therapy animal. It was the stance of something older, something trained. His growl deepened into a guttural rumble and his lips peeled back just slightly, not enough to provoke but enough to warn. One of the bikers laughed. "Look at the mutt. Thinks he's back in uniform." Briggs took another step forward. "I remember that dog," he muttered. "Echo, right? They said he snapped, that he should have been put down. Guess they were wrong." His boots stopped inches from Echo's line of defense. Sienna trembled, fingers gripping the whistle hidden in her pocket. Briggs knelt, daring to lean in. "You think this dog's gonna save you?" he whispered. Echo didn't lunge. He didn't bark. But his growl dropped into something primal, so low it seemed to vibrate the air between them. Then, in the silence between revving engines and Briggs's words, a soft voice broke through. "Sienna." Her lips barely moved. She whispered one word. "Guard." Echo moved, not with fury but with precision. He surged forward, intercepting Briggs before the man had fully risen. His body struck like a battering ram, knocking the ex-cop off his feet and onto the pavement. Briggs cursed, trying to scramble back, but Echo had already planted himself squarely over Sienna, shoulders broad, hackles raised, teeth bared. One of the bikers revved again and took a step forward, uncertain. Echo turned his head, locked eyes. That was enough. Sienna's fingers tightened around the whistle. Her heart pounded like a trapped bird in her chest. Her vision blurred, but her breath was steady. She pulled it to her lips and blew. The sound was thin but piercing, cutting through engines, through noise, through fear. Far down Maple Street, Wyatt Hartley dropped his coffee mug on the porch. It shattered at his feet. Back at the underpass, Briggs snarled from the ground, wiping blood from his cheek where he'd hit the pavement. "You little—" Echo snarled again, louder this time, and stepped forward. Sienna remained on the ground behind him, clutching the whistle in one hand, eyes wide but clear. Not frozen, not broken, just ready. Briggs rose slowly, eyes flicking toward the direction of the sound. He knew what was coming. He spat on the ground and jerked his head toward the others. "Let's go." One by one, the bikes peeled off, tires screeching. Briggs was the last to mount, his eyes locked on Echo. "Just a dog," he muttered. "Should have stayed dead." Then he was gone. Echo didn't move until the last engine faded. Then he turned, nose pressing gently to Sienna's cheek. She clutched his fur tightly, burying her face in his shoulder. Only then did she cry, not out of fear, but because she hadn't run, because Echo hadn't left. The moment stretched thin, like glass about to break. One of the bikers dismounted. His boots hit the asphalt with a crunch of gravel, fingers twitching as he adjusted the gloves on his hands. He moved closer, slow, like he was trying to show he wasn't a threat, though the look in his eyes betrayed him. He didn't see a little girl. He saw a pawn. Sienna's hands trembled, one clenched around the silver whistle Wyatt had given her, the other fisted tightly in Echo's fur. The weight of sound and light and threat pressed down on her chest like a closing vice. The biker reached out, two fingers extended, maybe for her arm, maybe for the whistle, maybe to hurt. It didn't matter. Echo exploded, not with a bark or a snarl, but like a trigger had been pulled in his spine. One fluid motion, a leap, a pivot, the snap of jaws. The biker didn't even have time to scream before he hit the ground, flat on his back, Echo's weight crushing his chest, teeth bared just inches from his throat. The other bikers lurched forward, but froze at the sight. Echo wasn't just attacking. He was controlling, disarmed, immobilized, restrained, every motion surgical, every ounce of fury contained behind the leash of discipline. Sienna rose to her feet, small and shaking, but there was a steadiness in her eyes. Her voice barely registered, but it cut through the thick air like a bell. "Guard!" Echo's ears flicked. His stance shifted, but he didn't move from the man beneath him. He understood. It was the same word Wyatt had used on training fields under sun-scorched skies. The word he whispered during night drills when Echo was younger, faster, a soldier in black fur. The word that once meant, "Hold your line." Sienna remembered, and so did Echo. The biker under him whimpered, trying to twist free, but Echo pressed his paw into the man's sternum, still not biting, but close. His growl was steady low and alive. Then, as if she'd been holding her breath for minutes, Sienna raised the whistle to her lips. A single sharp blow, a note that seemed to slice the air. 2 blocks away, Wyatt was crouched in his garage, fixing a bike chain, when the sound reached him. He didn't register it at first, not consciously. It was like his body heard before his mind did. Then, his chest tightened. The sound was distinct. Her whistle. Training snapped into place. He dropped the wrench, bolted from the garage. "Rachel!" he shouted into the house, but he didn't wait for an answer. He was already sprinting barefoot down the front steps, keys left behind, badge forgotten, heart in his throat. Because he knew. There's a difference between a child's whistle for attention and the sound of survival. Back at the underpass, the silence after the whistle was staggering. Even the bikers seemed thrown, unsure whether to press or retreat. Echo didn't budge. The man beneath him whimpered, "Call it off! Call the damn thing off!" Sienna stood over him, tiny but unmoving. "He's not a thing," she said. Her voice didn't shake this time. "He's Echo." Wyatt's truck roared down Maple Street in seconds, tires screeching as he turned into the side alley near the overpass. He didn't park, just slammed the door open and ran. And there, he saw it. Sienna, Echo, the biker on the ground. And the rest, already backing away on their bikes like smoke breaking apart in wind. He drew his weapon, stepping between them and his family. "Get away from her," he barked. The bikers hesitated. Briggs wasn't with them anymore. They didn't like being without orders. One revved his engine, another cursed. But they scattered, not because of the gun, because of the dog, because Echo hadn't moved an inch. Wyatt knelt as the last bike disappeared around the corner. Sienna was crying again, not loud, but in that silent, hiccuping way she did when words weren't enough. Her hands were still clenched around the whistle, now damp from her grip. Echo finally looked at Wyatt. The man, the officer, the one who'd given him up. And in that moment, there was no judgment, only understanding. Wyatt reached out. Echo stepped back, allowing the biker to squirm away, clutching his bruised ribs. But no one cared about him now. Wyatt wrapped Sienna in his arms. "I heard you," he whispered into her hair. "I heard you, baby." Her voice was muffled against his shirt. "He guarded. I know. He did exactly what he was meant to do." He looked down at Echo. "You remembered." Echo sat beside them. No wag, no bark, just the stillness of duty fulfilled. That night, Wyatt sat on the porch, Echo lying at his feet, ears twitching at every sound on the wind. Sienna slept with her door cracked open, her pillow clutched tight. The whistle was on her nightstand. Rachel didn't say much, but when she came out to check on them, she brought Echo a blanket, and left it without a word. The red and blue strobes painted jagged lines across the alley walls, flashing over the cracked asphalt where tire marks still smoked. Wyatt's cruiser skidded to a stop behind a row of patrol cars. Officers were already fanning out, radios crackling, guns holstered, confusion thick in the air. But he didn't need a report. His eyes locked onto the only thing that mattered: Sienna. She sat on the curb, her knees pulled to her chest, arms wrapped tight around her shins. Her mouth was slightly open, but no sound came. Her eyes, those wide kaleidoscope eyes, were fixed on the middle distance. Not crying, not blinking, just gone somewhere else inside. Rachel knelt beside her, one arm around her daughter's shoulder. She looked up at Wyatt with a face torn between rage and fear. "She hasn't said a word," she whispered. "Not one." But Echo was standing sentry a few feet away, unmoved since Wyatt left the house. His posture was stone. Square, alert, one paw still braced on the chest of the biker pinned beneath him. The man groaned, spitting blood from his mouth as Wyatt approached. "Get this damn mutt off me," he rasped, voice shaky. Wyatt crouched, close enough to feel the heat rising from the man's skin. His badge gleamed under the flashing lights. "You're lucky he didn't finish the job." The biker coughed, smirked. "Wasn't here to kill the girl." Wyatt's knuckles went white around the edge of his belt. "You're going to tell me everything," he said quietly. The biker turned his head slightly, eyes glinting. "I've said enough." And then he said it. the words that turned Wyatt's breath cold. "Briggs sends his regards." The world shrank. For a second the alley faded. The flashing lights, the murmuring cops, the distant sirens, they all vanished into a soundless fog. Briggs. The name came back like the sting of a reopened scar. Wyatt stood, his fists curling. Echo let out a low growl, deep and guttural, like the memory of war had been summoned back from beneath his ribs. He pressed his weight forward, forcing a groan from the biker, but didn't attack. Wyatt's voice was steel. "You tell Briggs if he comes near my daughter again, he won't get a warning shot." The biker laughed, coughing. "You think he's afraid of you?" He looked toward Sienna. "He remembers that dog, remembers what happened that night." Wyatt flinched. "I said shut up," he snapped, but his voice cracked, because part of him wanted to hear it, part of him already knew. Echo stepped back at Wyatt's subtle hand signal, finally allowing officers to restrain and cuff the biker. 2 deputies hauled him to his feet, reading Miranda rights that felt hollow in the open air. Wyatt walked back to Sienna. Rachel looked up, her hand never leaving their daughter's shoulder. "What did he say?" Wyatt hesitated. He couldn't lie. Not to her. Not now. "Briggs?" Rachel's face hardened like glass left too long in frost. "I thought he was gone, discharged, vanished." "He's not gone," Wyatt murmured. "He's watching." Echo sat beside them, body tense, but eyes locked on Sienna. Wyatt dropped to one knee, facing her. "Hey, kiddo," he whispered. "I'm here." Nothing. He reached out slowly, placing one hand over hers. No pullback, no shake, but no response either. Just silence. Echo edged closer, his massive head nudging under her elbow. That broke something. Sienna blinked. Her lower lip quivered. Then she leaned sideways, head resting on Echo's shoulder. Tears didn't fall, words didn't come. But her hand opened, and the whistle dropped into Wyatt's palm. Later, in the back of the cruiser, Wyatt stared at the whistle in his hand. Silver, smooth, warm from her grip. It had worked, but not without cost. The child he'd carried on his shoulders, the one who danced in the hallway with her arms flapping when excited, had blown that whistle not for a test, but because she knew danger. And now, her world, already fragile, had cracks that couldn't be unseen. He looked up into the rearview mirror. Echo sat in the back, alert, watching the road behind them, like he knew it wasn't over, not even close. The knock at the door came just past midnight. 3 sharp raps, no doorbell. Wyatt was still in uniform, seated at the kitchen table with Echo stretched at his feet. The house was silent, but for the hum of the refrigerator and the low rhythm of Rachel's breathing from the next room, finally asleep after hours of watching over a daughter who wouldn't speak, wouldn't blink, wouldn't cry. Wyatt didn't hesitate. He opened the door with one hand on the holster at his hip. Jared Pierce stood there, framed by the porch light like a ghost made of regret and nicotine. "You got a minute?" the man rasped. Wyatt stepped aside, wordless. Inside, Jared didn't sit. He hovered near the window, eyes scanning the treetops like he expected red dots to bloom against the glass. The man had that twitchy veteran posture, shoulders coiled, fingers always near a belt loop or the rim of his coat. Wyatt stayed quiet. Let the silence stretch. Finally, Jared exhaled. "You ever ask yourself how they knew?" Wyatt frowned. "Knew what?" Jared glanced over his shoulder. "Where she'd be. Alone. With the dog, Wyatt's jaw tensed. "Start talking." Jared nodded slowly. "There's a leak inside the department. Maybe not intentional, maybe just someone talking too much over beers. But Briggs hears things. He's got ears still inside." Wyatt's voice dropped. "How do you know?" "I used to be one of them," Jared said, "before I crawled out." Jared finally sat down on the very edge of the chair like he didn't trust the house to hold him. He took a folded envelope from inside his coat and slid it across the table. Wyatt opened it. A few grainy printouts, photos, partial text messages, a copied memo from 2 years ago. One note stood out. "Canine Echo. Reassignment canceled. Behavioral unstable. Officer Calder deceased. File closed." Wyatt's blood turned to ice. "I didn't understand it back then," Jared said. "Didn't care. But now, after today, it lines up." Wyatt stared at the page. "Why Echo?" Jared ran a hand through his unkempt hair. "Briggs used to talk about that dog like it was the devil. Called him a traitor. Said he chose the wrong side during the raid." Wyatt looked up sharply. "What raid?" Jared's face hardened. "The one that got Calder killed." The room felt smaller suddenly, like the walls were leaning in. Wyatt remembered that night, the chaos, the screaming, the flashbangs and smoke. He remembered the body bag they zipped around Calder's broken ribs. He remembered Echo, limping and bloodied, refusing to leave his handler's side. He also remembered the report. The one that said Echo had panicked, had failed to follow command. But Calder's voice, hoarse and loyal still, echoed in Wyatt's mind. "If anything happens to me, trust the dog." Briggs was there, Wyatt said aloud, connecting the dots. He was in the van, part of the breach team. Jared nodded grimly. "And he blamed Echo. Said the mutt snapped too early, ruined the op." Wyatt stared at the whistle on the table. The same whistle that hours ago pulled Echo from a child's side into a wall of engines and threat. "Briggs wasn't angry at me," Wyatt murmured. "No," Jared confirmed. "He was hunting a ghost." Rachel stepped into the kitchen in her robe, eyes puffy from sleep. "Everything okay?" Wyatt looked up, his voice cracked around the truth. "It's never been okay." He held up the printout. "He's not just some gang leader. He's a man with a grudge, a man who thinks Echo betrayed him. And now—" His eyes flicked toward the hallway, toward the room where Sienna lay curled under a blanket with one hand resting on Echo's paw. "He's using her to settle the score." Rachel's hand flew to her chest. Jared stood, voice quiet. "I'm sorry. I should have come sooner. I thought maybe he was bluffing. But after what I saw today—" Wyatt didn't answer. He stared at the file in his hands like it might start bleeding. Jared stepped toward the door. "If you need anything, I'm around. And Wyatt, lock your back gate." After the door shut, Wyatt turned off the kitchen light and leaned against the counter. His breath came slow, deliberate, like he was trying to will back the man he used to be, the cop who followed rules, who trusted reports, who believed good guys wore badges and dogs were just tools. But that version of himself died the night Calder did. And now he was left with a daughter who didn't speak, a dog labeled defective, and an enemy that never truly left. He turned toward the hallway. "Echo," he called softly. The shepherd was already there, waiting, watching, and in his eyes something Wyatt hadn't seen in years. Not fear, not rage, but remembrance. It was nearly 2 a.m. when Wyatt Hartley pulled his cruiser behind the old station warehouse, an off-site archive used by the Redwood Bluff Police Department before digital storage replaced dusty boxes. No surveillance cameras here, no clerks asking questions, just cobwebbed silence and the hum of sodium lights flickering overhead. He used a master key he wasn't supposed to still have. It turned with a reluctant groan, like even the lock was warning him not to dig deeper. Inside, the air was stale like old carpet soaked in memory and time. Rows of metal shelving stretched down the dim corridor, sagging under the weight of forgotten case files, disciplinary reviews, training logs, and lives sealed in manila folders. He hadn't been here in years, not since Calder. Wyatt turned on his flashlight. He wasn't here as a cop tonight. He wasn't here as a father. He was here as someone who had failed. He found the box labeled K9 Unit, Discontinued Assets, tucked behind a rusted file cabinet. It was marked for shredding with a faded yellow sticker dated 2 years back. He dropped to his knees and flipped open the lid. And there it was. Echo. Serial, Netard A991K9M, Final Evaluation Report. The top page had a red stamp across it. Unstable. Recommended for termination. Wyatt's fingers hovered above it. His chest tightened. He read slowly, one line at a time. Echo had failed to obey direct orders during Operation Grey Talon. It claimed the shepherd had broken formation, engaged prematurely, and instigated hostile fire. That was the official version, the version that got Calder killed. Wyatt flipped to the next page, a witness report, signed Briggs, Clayton, rank, Senior Tactical Liaison. The name stared back at him like a ghost rising from the paper. He kept reading. Briggs' statement claimed that Echo panicked at the sound of glass breaking and charged into the wrong room, alerting the suspects, claimed he triggered a shootout that cost lives. But the handwriting was too neat, the phrasing too clean. Wyatt had heard Briggs talk. That man didn't use words like premature entry protocol violation. Then something caught his eye. In the incident timeline, Briggs noted that he was assigned to rear containment, not primary breach. That was a lie. Wyatt had been there. Briggs had been in the lead van, inside. He tore through the remaining pages, hands shaking. Another folder. Officer Calder, post-mortem debrief. No mention of Echo's protection during the final minutes. No acknowledgement that the dog stayed by Calder's body even as bullets flew. No mention that Echo had shielded a civilian undercover agent from crossfire. None of that was here, because it had been erased. Wyatt leaned back on his heels, folder limp in his hands. He saw it all now. The way Briggs wormed his way through the system, how he framed the dog, twisted the facts, maybe to protect himself, maybe out of spite, maybe both. Echo hadn't disobeyed orders. He had obeyed the truth. The dog had sensed the betrayal in the room, the danger, and he'd reacted not out of fear, but out of loyalty. He wasn't unstable. He was right. Wyatt heard a sound behind him and turned fast hand reflexively on his gun. But it was just the wind through a broken window pane. His heartbeat didn't slow. He stood, folding the report back into the folder and slipping it under his jacket. He left the rest untouched. Some ghosts needed to stay buried, but not this one. He locked the warehouse on his way out, though the gesture felt pointless. The real security breach had happened years ago, when truth was traded for convenience, and a dog's loyalty was punished with silence. By the time he got home, dawn was beginning to stain the edges of the sky. He stepped inside the house like a man returning from war. Echo lay at the threshold of Sienna's room, ears perked, tail giving a soft wag at Wyatt's approach. Wyatt crouched. He held the folder in front of him, eyes meeting the dog's. "I read it," he whispered. "I know what they did to you." Echo didn't move, just blinked and waited. Wyatt reached out and placed a hand on the shepherd's neck just below the scar. "You didn't fail him. You were trying to protect him, even when no one else did." Echo leaned into his palm. No sound. Just wait. Just knowing. From inside the bedroom, Sienna stirred in her sleep, and Wyatt made a silent vow, one he should have made long ago. "I will protect you, both of you. This time, I won't look away." It started with a pencil, then another, then a dozen more scattered across the coffee table in a chaotic rainbow of graphite and colored wood. Crayons rolled off the edge like fallen leaves. Pages curled beneath Sienna's knees as she hunched over the sketch pad on the living room rug, her brow furrowed, silent as always, but her hands relentless. The first drawing had been simple. Echo, asleep at her feet, his body curled into a crescent moon beside her chair. She'd drawn his eyes first, those deep, amber eyes that watched her even in dreams, then the scar on his right shoulder, then the line of his back, taut and alert even when still. But she didn't stop there. Another page, another version of Echo, this time barking. Another. He was standing in front of a girl, drawn with no mouth, facing a wall of smoke. Rachel had passed through the room that morning, basket of folded laundry in her arms, and slowed just a little at the edge of the rug. She didn't say anything. Didn't have to. Sienna's world was beginning to speak again, but not in words, in lines, in shadows, in truth. By afternoon, the living room floor was covered. One picture showed a building on fire, orange and red wax strokes bleeding into blackened window frames. Another revealed what looked like a tactical vest tiny name tag sketched with astonishing detail. And then, the man. Wyatt was walking through the house with a mug of coffee when he stopped. He set the mug down. His eyes traced the drawing. The face stared up at him, pencil dark and expressionless. Square jaw, a long scar down the left cheek, eyes that didn't blink, shoulders stiff in a stance he recognized all too well. Wyatt didn't need a name. He knew who it was. Briggs. He knelt beside her slowly, careful not to startle. "Sienna," he said softly. "Who is this?" She didn't look up, just kept shading the edge of Echo's ear with precise focus. He tried again. "Sweetheart, where did you see this man?" Her hand paused, hovered in the air. Her lips parted just slightly, then closed again. And then she whispered, so faint he almost missed it. "He was there when Echo got hurt." Wyatt felt the breath catch in his chest. It wasn't the kind of thing you wanted to believe, that your child, your little girl, was drawing from a memory she should never have. That what you'd buried under years of silence and classified files had clawed its way back through the mind of someone who couldn't forget what she'd never been told. He reached out, gently turning the page. The next drawing was different. This one showed Echo mid-leap, a man behind him holding what looked like a detonator. The scar on the man's face was shaded darker now, like it was burning through the paper. Another sketch showed Echo lying on the ground, blood pooling beneath him. A small figure, a girl, stood nearby, arms outstretched, protecting him. Wyatt swallowed hard. "Did Echo show you this?" Sienna shook her head. "No, she whispered. "He remembers it?" Wyatt didn't respond. Couldn't. His hands trembled slightly as he gathered the papers, his brain racing faster than his heart. He thought of Briggs' file, the falsified reports, the raid, the botched testimony. Echo had never truly forgotten. Neither had Sienna. Maybe what they shared wasn't just emotional. Maybe it was deeper instinctual, a language beyond words, spoken in quiet rooms and firelit nightmares. He looked down at her again. "You're helping me," he murmured. "You and Echo. You're both showing me what I didn't want to see." Sienna didn't answer. She didn't need to. Instead, she slid one more drawing across the floor toward him. It was of their house, and it was surrounded by shadowy figures on motorcycles. From the hallway, Echo padded in slowly, tail low, ears alert. He didn't growl, didn't bark. He simply walked up beside Sienna, lay down beside her, and rested his head in her lap. And Wyatt understood. They weren't just remembering anymore. They were warning him. The sound of the drill echoed down the hallway like distant thunder, sharp, mechanical, unforgiving. Wyatt knelt by the front door, sweat beading at his temple, hands rough with effort. Another deadbolt. Another reinforcement. His movements were precise but rushed, as though speed alone could push back what he now knew was coming. The storm wasn't in the forecast, but it was in the air. Behind him, the hardwood floors creaked. Echo paced the length of the living room, nails clicking with a nervous rhythm that matched the pulse in Wyatt's neck. The dog's ears twitched at every outside sound, distant engine revs, the flutter of birds from a rooftop, the wind rattling the old mailbox. He moved from window to door, back to window, like a soldier scanning a perimeter. Something primal in him had awakened. Something he remembered, even if no one had told him to. In the bedroom down the hall, Rachel folded a small pair of socks and placed them carefully into a faded purple backpack. Sienna sat on the bed, quietly watching. Her sketchpad was clutched to her chest like armor. She didn't ask questions, not in words anyway. But her eyes moved from Rachel's hands to the doorway again and again, waiting for Wyatt to reappear, as if needing confirmation that this was precaution, not panic. Rachel tucked a small flashlight into the front pouch of the bag. A laminated card with emergency numbers. Headphones, snacks, wipes, a spare whistle. Then she gently laid Echo's service tag inside. Sienna's fingers curled around it instantly, as if it were a lifeline. "You think this will be enough?" Rachel asked softly when Wyatt stepped into the room, wiping dust from his palms. He looked at the bag, then at Sienna, then at her. "No," he admitted, "but it's something." He leaned against the doorframe, and for a long moment the three of them just stood there, tethered together by silence, uncertainty, and the fragile threads of love stretched taut by fear. Then Wyatt said, "I need to tell you something." They moved to the kitchen. Sienna stayed in the hallway, back pressed to Echo's side. Wyatt gripped the edge of the counter, his jaw clenched. His voice, when it came, was low and bitter like gravel caught in a river current. "It wasn't just a failed raid," he said. "Back then, the one that took Calder." Rachel froze, halfway through pouring water into a kettle. Wyatt didn't look at her. "I knew Briggs was unstable. I knew there were gaps in his reports. But I vouched for him anyway. Said he was clean. Said we could trust him." His hands curled into fists. "I was wrong." Rachel said nothing. "I let him stay on the team," Wyatt continued, "because I didn't want to ruin his career, because I thought I owed him something. Maybe I did. But I looked the other way. And that raid, he exhaled sharply. It was a setup. He fed false intel to cover his own side deal. Calder walked into a slaughter. Echo took the hit meant for me. A long pause. I let the wolf in, he said finally. And now he's back at our door. Rachel turned off the kettle. She walked to him, her expression unreadable, hands trembling only slightly. You don't get to choose the past, Wyatt, she said. Only what you do with it now. He nodded, hollow. She placed a hand over his. Then let's not run this time. The night settled in thick and restless. Every creak of the house, every passing vehicle was sharper, more suspect. Echo stayed by the door, unmoving. His eyes tracked shadows, but his body remained still, as if conserving energy for something only he could sense coming. Upstairs, Wyatt lay awake in the dark, the ceiling fan spinning slowly overhead like the blade of a decision he couldn't take back. He had built a home, but now he had to defend it, not just with walls and locks and guns, but with truth. And this time, he would not be silent. In Sienna's room, the girl was asleep beside Echo's paw. Her fingers rested lightly on his fur, steady, like the beat of a drum she alone could hear. Echo didn't blink. He just watched the door, waiting, guarding, knowing. The clinic buzzed with the quiet rhythms of a small-town morning. Fluorescent lights hummed faintly. A nurse chuckled at a cat refusing to leave its carrier. Someone's coffee burned on the hot plate. Outside, wind teased the flag at half-mast. Rachel stood at the medication cabinet, double-checking labels. Her shift was halfway through. A lull before the afternoon storm of walk-ins. Then the phone rang. But not the main line, her private line, the one only Wyatt and emergency services used. She stared at it for a second too long, then picked up. "This is Rachel." A pause. Then the voice on the other end came low, clipped, urgent. "Ma'am, this is Officer Strickland. You need to exit the building immediately." Her stomach dropped. "What's going on?" she asked. A silence. Then, "Possible threat linked to Clayton Briggs. He may be headed to your location. We're dispatching units, but your husband said to tell you, don't wait." Rachel's breath hitched. And then she remembered Sienna. She was 2 hallways down. In the pediatric counseling room, nestled into a beanbag chair with a therapy dog curled beside her. Crayons spilled at her feet, her focus entirely on the sketch she was working on. A figure that looked a lot like Echo, standing in front of flames. Rachel bolted. "Sweetheart," she said, kneeling down, trying to keep her voice level. "We have to go, okay? Right now." Sienna blinked up, not frightened, just puzzled. The dog beside her stirred. Rachel reached for her hand, trying to smile. "It's just a drill." But as she stood, she heard something outside, the low, guttural purr of a motorcycle engine pulling into the rear lot. And her heart stopped. Back at the Hartley house, Echo had been lying at the front window, head on paws, eyes fixed on nothing. But when the wind shifted, when a scent only he could detect hit the air, he stood. No command, no sound, just instinct. Wyatt saw it. From the dining table where case files were strewn, he noticed the change Echo's spine straightening, ears pivoting, muscles tightening like a coiled spring. Then the bark, short, sharp, guttural. Wyatt was already grabbing his keys before Echo reached the door. The roads blurred. Red lights became mere suggestions. The cruiser howled as it tore down Main Street, tires shrieking at corners. Wyatt's knuckles were white on the wheel. Every second was too slow, every corner too quiet. He radioed in, but dispatch gave the same answer. No units on site yet, no confirmation, no visuals. But Wyatt knew. He knew Briggs. Rachel had locked the main entrance. She'd pulled the blinds. Her hand shook as she guided Sienna down the corridor, past exam rooms, into the old staff break room with only one small window and a heavy door. "Stay here," she whispered. Sienna didn't speak, just looked at her. Then looked at the door. Outside, the front bell rang. Ding, 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 insistent, mechanical, then silence. Rachel reached for her phone, fingers fumbling. No signal. Wyatt was 2 blocks away when he saw the first sign. A cruiser abandoned rear bumper, crumpled. No officer. Then the power flickered at the intersection. The entire block lost electricity. He pressed harder on the gas. Sirens blaring now, and in his head, just one name: Rachel. 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 The clinic door creaked open. Clayton Briggs stepped inside, boots leaving wet marks on the tile. Leather jacket zipped high. One glove missing. The other wrapped tight around something metallic impossible to identify at a glance. His eyes scanned the front desk, the chairs, the fish tank bubbling obliviously. He smiled. "Rachel," he called out. His voice echoed down the hallway like poison laced with honey. "You always were the smart one. Let me guess, back door?" No. You'd want to keep the girl safe." He began walking, each step slow, deliberate. "I'm not here to hurt her, you know," he called. "I just need to finish something. Tie up loose ends. Say hello to an old friend." Inside the break room, Rachel braced the door with her body. She held a metal stool in one hand, more symbolic than useful. Her breathing came shallow. Sienna crouched beside her, hand gripping her sketchpad like a shield. Echo. Flames. A scarred face. The drawing was complete. And suddenly her voice returned. "He's here." Rachel looked down. Sienna's eyes were wide, but her voice was clear. Briggs stopped outside the door. "You know, Wyatt never did have the guts to put a bullet in me," he said. "But that dog? That animal? He came close." Silence. "I bet he still remembers." He raised his hand and knocked. Once, then again louder. "I just want to talk." That's when the screech of tires rang out from the front lot. Wyatt, boots on pavement, door slamming, shouts echoing through the building. "Rachel!" Briggs turned, smiled. "Right on cue." He stepped away from the break room door, disappearing into the hallway shadows just as Wyatt burst through the front. Gun raised, eyes scanning, Echo at his side, fur bristling, head low, growl deep in his chest like a rumble of oncoming thunder. The hunt had begun, and this time it would end in truth. The clinic had turned cold, not from the thermostat, but from something more primal fear hanging in the air like fog that couldn't be breathed through. Rachel sat against the wall of the main waiting room, her back pressed tight to the cool drywall. Blood pounded in her ears, her body frozen between instinct and calculation. She didn't dare reach for Sienna, who sat 3 feet away, cross-legged, hugging her sketchbook like it was armor. The girl's eyes were open, still, trained on the man pacing in front of them. Clayton Briggs. He moved like a shadow on a chain, never still, never predictable. A black device rested in his gloved hand. Wires hung like veins from the crude casing, leading to a bundle taped beneath the receptionist's desk. dangerously close to the gas main valve marked with bright red stencil. High pressure, do not tamper. The lights above flickered, and the room briefly bathed in darkness before stabilizing again. 3 other clinic staff members, 2 nurses, and the janitor knelt silently near the back hallway. No one spoke. No one cried. Fear had stolen even the sound of breathing. Briggs turned sharply and faced Rachel, a half-smile forming beneath the thick scar that split his cheek. "You think he's coming, don't you?" he asked, tilting his head. "Your husband, the great Wyatt Hartley." Rachel didn't answer. Her hands curled into fists behind her back. "I used to sit 2 desks away from him." "Did he ever tell you that?" Briggs said. "Before the war, before the badge, he followed orders. I bent them. That's why I survived." Sienna flinched slightly at his voice, and Echo's name moved unspoken through the room like a ghost. Briggs noticed. He crouched, his eyes level with the little girl. "I've seen your drawings," he said softly. "He still follows you around like a shadow, huh?" Sienna's fingers clutched the paper tighter. "That dog should have died with the others," Briggs murmured. "But fate's got a sense of humor." Outside, sirens screamed. Then, silence. 3 patrol cars arrived, lights flashing blue against the white walls of the clinic's exterior. Officers drew weapons and took cover. One of them, Sergeant Hallis, raised a bullhorn. "Clayton Briggs, this is the police. Come out with your hands visible." Inside, Briggs smiled without humor. "Ah, the cavalry." He rose and walked toward the front glass door, not opening it, just pressing his palm flat against it. He made sure they saw the device in his hand, held it high, like a priest with a sacred relic. "This," he shouted through the glass, "isn't a bluff." Wyatt's cruiser pulled up next, skidding slightly as he braked too hard. He was out before the engine stopped. "Rachel," he breathed. He scanned the perimeter. Echo jumped from the back seat, muscles tense, hackles raised. Wyatt didn't wait for instructions. But Hallis stepped in front of him, one hand outstretched. "Wyatt, don't. He's rigged the front desk, gas line, unknown explosive." Wyatt stared past the blockade to the building that held everything he loved. His wife, his daughter, and the man who nearly destroyed Echo. "I'm not waiting," he said. "Wyatt!" But he was already moving. Fast. Quiet. Inside, Briggs turned sharply. Boots. He cocked his head. "Well?" he whispered. "There's the man of the hour." Wyatt stepped slowly into view, hands open, unarmed. His vest was zipped, badge glinting on his chest, but his eyes were only focused on one thing: Rachel. She nodded once. Just once. Sienna sat unmoving, her eyes locked on Echo's name stitched across her sleeve. "You're a hard man to kill, Briggs," Wyatt said, voice low. Briggs scoffed. "And you're still pretending to be righteous, still pretending Echo was just a casualty of war instead of your conscience made flesh." Wyatt took a step forward. "Don't," Briggs warned, raising the device. Everyone froze. "I wired the trigger to the pressure control under the front desk. Blow the line and this whole place goes up like a goddamn firework." Wyatt's breath caught. "You don't want this." "No?" Briggs asked, eyes wild now. "You took my badge, my name, and now you're raising a daughter with that dog like some family fairy tale while I rot in silence. What's left for me but fire?" He twitched, fingers tightening on the switch. Sienna whimpered. That sound soft, broken cut through Wyatt like a blade, but something else happened, too. Echo. From outside, just beyond the cracked glass doors, a low growl echoed through the entryway. The kind of sound that bypassed logic and drilled straight into the primitive part of the brain. Briggs stiffened. Wyatt moved one step closer. "You remember that sound, don't you?" Briggs' fingers shook. "He remembers you," Wyatt continued. "And you remember Calder." "Don't say his name," Briggs hissed. "I'll say it," Wyatt snapped. "He died because you broke protocol. Because you gave an order, Echo disobeyed, and saved lives." Silence. The red light on the device blinked slowly. Once. Twice. Wyatt locked eyes with Rachel. He mouthed it. "Now." Rachel lunged, grabbing Sienna, shielding her body at the same time. Boom! The door shattered inward as Echo hurled through it, shoulder first. Wyatt dove to the side. Echo crossed the room like lightning. Briggs turned, too late, and the detonator slipped. The detonator skidded across the linoleum floor, spinning once before coming to rest just inches from Sienna's foot. Briggs didn't move. Echo stood over him now, chest heaving, a low growl rumbling deep in his throat. His body formed a barrier between Briggs and the rest of the room, between danger and the girl curled tightly against her mother's chest. Wyatt stormed forward, weapon drawn, but his eyes were on the blinking light. "Don't touch it!" someone shouted from outside. But another voice cut through the noise, a small, clear whisper. "It's not real." Everyone froze. Wyatt turned. Sienna had edged forward, crouching near the device. Her fingers didn't tremble. Her voice didn't rise. Her gaze was locked on the seams of the plastic casing, the misshapen buttons, the disconnected wires looped around the top. One wasn't even soldered. She looked up at Wyatt. "It's not real," she said again. "It's theater." Wyatt's breath hitched. He crouched beside her, gently nudging the device with the tip of his penlight. No resistance, no pressure feedback, no connection to anything but fear. Rachel's face went pale, not from the device, but from something else. She stared at Briggs, whose pupils were wide, sweat soaking through his shirt despite the cold. His hands trembled, not with steadiness or calculation, but with the erratic twitch of someone overstimulated, overstretched. "Stimulants," she whispered. Wyatt looked up. "You're sure?" She nodded. "I've seen it before. High doses, paranoia, delusions of grandeur. He's not in control. He just thinks he is." Wyatt turned back to the man on the floor. Briggs had collapsed against the base of the reception desk, hands over his ears, mumbling something unintelligible, some half-prayer, half-muttered chant. Gone was the predator from moments before. What remained was a man unraveling in real time. Wyatt raised his voice, calm but firm. "Echo!" The dog turned, golden eyes flicking to him. "Guard!" Echo moved not with violence, but with purpose. He stepped forward, placing one paw on Briggs' shoulder. His weight pinned the man down, not just physically, but psychologically. Briggs whimpered beneath him, his bravado finally bleeding out. Wyatt's radio crackled. "Is it clear?" He clicked back. "Clear. Device is a fake. Suspect restrained." A long silence. Then, "Copy that. EMS and bomb squad en route." Wyatt exhaled for what felt like the first time in hours. But his eyes returned to his daughter, still crouched near the shell of the detonator, as if examining a puzzle. He walked to her slowly, knelt beside her. "You did good, Bug," he said softly. Sienna didn't smile. She simply nodded and whispered, "He wanted us to believe it, but Echo didn't." Wyatt's throat tightened. He reached out, brushing a loose strand of hair from her forehead. "You're safe now," he said. She looked up. because of him. Behind them, Echo let out a soft huff, then lay down still beside Briggs, still alert, still guarding. The quiet never lasts. Just as Wyatt turned to signal the all clear to the responders outside, Briggs moved. It was fast, too fast for a man unraveling. His hand shot from under his jacket, blade glinting silver in the fluorescent light, and in one broken motion he surged upward from beneath Echo's paw, twisting, slashing. "Sienna, down!" Wyatt shouted, already moving. But Echo was faster. The German shepherd spun on instinct, not away, toward, always toward. He lunged, body airborne, a blur of tan and black muscle. He collided with Briggs mid-motion, knocking the man off balance. The knife caught Echo just behind the shoulder, slicing deep. The sound it made, wet, unnatural, seemed to pause the room's breath. Sienna screamed. It wasn't the startled cry of a child, but something raw and unfiltered like the sky tearing open. Wyatt would carry that sound for the rest of his life. Briggs landed hard. Echo stood over him, wobbling, his front paw barely bearing weight. Blood pooled beneath him, dark and spreading too fast. Wyatt didn't hesitate. He raised his sidearm. Time slowed. Sienna's scream still echoed behind his ribs. Briggs moved again, reaching for the blade toward the girl. Wyatt fired. The first shot struck center mass. Briggs dropped the knife. The second never came. Briggs hit the floor, gasping once before stilling completely. One hand twitched, then silence. Wyatt's gun lowered as he ran to Echo. The dog had collapsed, breathing hard, head low. Blood stained his coat, matting into the thick fur that once wore a badge. "Sienna, stay back!" Wyatt barked, reaching into his belt for gauze, pressure wraps, anything. But she was already there. Kneeling beside Echo, her small hands trembling but sure, she pressed down gently where the wound seeped. Her knees were soaked in red. She didn't care. "You're okay," she whispered. "Please, you're okay." Rachel knelt behind them, dialing EMS with one hand, cradling Sienna with the other, her voice shaking. "We need a trauma vet urgent. Multiple lacerations. Heavy blood loss. Name's Echo. He's everything." Wyatt looked down into Echo's eyes. They fluttered, dull. No, he murmured, pressing harder. "Stay with us. Stay with her." The sirens outside were louder now. Boots on the tile. The chaos returned, but Wyatt couldn't hear it. All he heard was Sienna's whisper. "All I wanted was to walk to the store." Echo's eyes opened halfway. A low, rattled breath escaped his muzzle. Then his tail moved just once. A thump, the faintest sound in a room that had heard screams and gunshots. But to Sienna, it was a vow. Wyatt burst through the ER doors, Echo limp in his arms, blood soaking his shirt. "Help! I need a trauma team now!" The room fell silent. A firm voice cut through. "Bring him here. Table 2. Move!" Dr. Marin Patel, small, focused, unshaken. Wyatt laid Echo down. "Blade wound, upper shoulder. Missed the lung, I think. Lots of blood." "Vitals dropping," a tech called. "He's crashing." "Let me work," Dr. Patel ordered. Wyatt stepped back as doors swung shut. Outside, Wyatt sank against the wall. Sienna, blood on her arms, whispered, "Don't let him go where I can't follow." "I won't," Wyatt promised, but knew some battles weren't his to fight. Inside, Echo's breath grew ragged. The machines beeped in their steady rhythm of hope until they didn't. In the hall, time slowed. Sienna knelt by the OR door, small hands pressed to the cold metal. She whispered, "Please don't forget I'm here." Wyatt and Rachel joined her, silent. The world outside kept turning, but here everything waited. Then the sound no one wanted, a flat line. "Code Blue! He's crashing!" "Charge to 50!" Dr. Patel barked. Sienna slipped through the doorframe, pressing her hands to the OR glass. "Echo, come back! I'm still here!" Inside, the team prepared to shock. Then beep, beep, beep. "Pulse is coming back." Echo's chest lifted, shallow but steady. Dr. Patel paused, glancing at Sienna through the glass. No words, just a nod. Wyatt crouched beside Sienna. "How did you know?" She whispered, "I felt him leave, but I wasn't ready." That night, no celebration, no cheers. Just a girl who had reached through glass and brought her guardian back not with machines, but with love and a whisper that refused to say goodbye. The envelope came unmarked, delivered in evidence plastic. Inside, a black leather journal, scorched at the edges. Wyatt sat alone in his office, Echo's collar beside him. He opened the first page. "You ever feel like the leash went to the wrong hand?" Briggs' angry handwriting filled the journal rants about the department, about Echo. "They gave the golden collar to a damn animal, one who obeyed without doubt. But not mine." Wyatt read on, heart sinking. "I told them the intel was clean. Let them walk in blind. Let the dog prove he's a hero. Let him feel what it's like to trust and lose. The ambush wasn't chance. It was betrayal. Calder died because Briggs needed to feel powerful." Rachel entered, read a few lines, horrified. "He blamed the dog," Wyatt whispered. "Echo was more loyal than he ever was." The final entry, "I see the girl with him now. He took something from me again. I won't let him win." Wyatt closed the journal. "He didn't break you, boy. He showed us who we could be without men like him." Sienna entered, placed a crayon drawing. Echo, a man, and a girl, framed by a heart. "Briggs is gone," she said. Wyatt nodded. "But not the damage." She tapped the drawing. "But this is louder." A knock came, measured, familiar somehow. A man stood at the door, worn jacket, cane, old badge, Thomas Greer, retired DEA. "I came to tell you what really happened that night," he said. Inside, Thomas showed Wyatt an old photo. Echo, standing over Calder, guarding his fallen partner through smoke and flame. "I was undercover. Echo didn't run. He held the line until help arrived. 32 minutes. Briggs called him rogue. Lied." Wyatt's jaw tightened. "They broke faith with him." Thomas nodded. "He gave loyalty we didn't deserve." Echo lifted his head, sensing the moment. Sienna rested a hand on his back. "She's his redemption," Thomas said. "Maybe he's hers too." Wyatt looked at Echo. "No, he never needed redemption. Just someone to believe in him." Before leaving, Thomas knelt by Echo. Different battlefield, same heart. Echo's tail thumped once. Rain tapped the windows as Echo rested in recovery. Sienna stayed at his side. "You're still my Echo," she whispered. "You don't have to protect me anymore. Just stay." Wyatt joined them, hand on Echo's paw. "You never failed. We failed you. I didn't fight for your truth. But I see you now." Sienna leaned against him. "He knew." Wyatt nodded. "Yeah, he always did." The storm outside continued, but inside, forgiveness began, Not as a grand gesture, but as a promise. We see you. We won't forget again. The rhythm of the house had changed. Gone were the rushed mornings, the click of Rachel's heels across the hardwood, the frantic search for car keys or misplaced lunch boxes. In their place, a softer pace, the sound of breath sinking between a girl and a dog, the quiet hum of a tablet as online lessons played in a sunlit corner of the living room. The couch had been pushed against the far wall. Throw rugs layered the floor for easier traction. A new orthopedic bed rested beneath the bay window right where the morning light came in golden and soft. That was Echo's spot now. From there, he could see the front door, the kitchen, and most importantly, Sienna. She sat cross-legged on the floor, pencil in hand, working through an assignment on weather systems. Her lips moved silently as she read, but her hand stayed in constant contact with Echo's shoulder. Just the tips of her fingers resting in reassurance. Echo was still healing. The scar down his flank was thick and pink, but the swelling had gone down. He moved slowly now, rising with caution, lying down with care. But he was here, and for Sienna, that was enough. Rachel stirred a pot of soup in the kitchen, her motions methodical but absent-minded. She glanced toward the living room and exhaled slowly. One of those exhales you don't realize you've been holding for weeks. Wyatt stood behind her, coffee mug in hand. The sleeve of his flannel shirt was rolled up, revealing a faint scratch still healing along his forearm. "She's different now," Rachel said, keeping her eyes forward. "Stronger, quieter, but not lost." Wyatt nodded. "She's sleeping through the night." Rachel stirred again. "No more hiding in closets." They didn't speak for a moment, just stood in the quiet warmth of the kitchen, listening to the pencil scratching paper, to Echo shifting his weight behind them. Then Wyatt set his mug down and looked out at them, at their daughter, sitting in that pool of sunlight, drawing shapes beside the only creature in the world who had never asked her to be different. "We got our girl back," he said quietly, voice catching at the edges. "Because of him." Rachel turned, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, she smiled without tension, without fear. "Then we owe him the world." Later that afternoon, Sienna finished her lesson early and curled beside Echo, her fingers tracing the edge of his ear. "I don't care if you never run again," she whispered. "You're still the bravest dog in the world." Echo didn't respond, but his tail just once thumped gently against the rug, and for Sienna, that was enough. The afternoon sun stretched long and golden across the back patio, casting soft shadows through the slats of the wooden fence. A breeze rustled the wind chimes Rachel had forgotten were even there, their music faint, hopeful. In the center of the yard, Echo lay still. His breathing was steady now, deeper, stronger, but the last few weeks had drained what little weight remained on his frame. The bandage was off, leaving a pink seam down his side, ugly but honest. A new therapy harness, matte black with wide padded straps, sat beside him, custom-stitched, reinforced. Wyatt had spent hours on the phone to get it rushed. Now, Rachel tightened the final strap across Echo's chest. Her hands trembled just a little. Sienna knelt beside him. Her hair was pulled back, messy, and her palms were dusty with soil from the garden. She hadn't planned for today to be special, but it was. Wyatt gave her a nod. "Go on." Sienna reached for the harness. "Okay," she whispered, fingers curling under the side buckles. "Let's try." It started slow. Echo shifted, one paw dragging awkwardly. His back legs trembled, unused to their own weight. His body shuddered with the effort, ribs flaring under his thin coat. Sienna held still, not pulling, not rushing. "Just us," she said softly, her eyes never leaving his. Echo grunted once low in his throat, then pushed, one leg, then the other, and then he stood, wobbly, crooked, but upright. There was no triumphant bark, no dramatic music, just breath, effort, determination carved into silence. Sienna didn't cheer. She simply stood too, beside him, holding the harness as if it were a shared secret. Wyatt exhaled through his teeth, hand gripping the porch railing. Rachel pressed her fingers to her lips, unable to speak. Echo turned his head, his eyes locked with Wyatt's. And in that second, everything unspoken passed between them. "I'm still here. I didn't give up. Not on her, not on you." Minutes passed. The wind shifted. And then Echo's legs gave out. But he didn't crash. Sienna guided him back down, slow and careful, her body curled protectively. She stroked his fur once, then smiled. "We'll try again tomorrow." Echo licked her knuckle in reply. A promise. It wasn't perfect, but it was standing. And in this quiet corner of Redwood Bluff, where broken things often found each other, that was enough to call it victory. The house had long since gone to sleep. Only the sound of the refrigerator's hum and the faint ticking of the hallway clock broke the silence. Outside, wind moved gently through the trees, brushing the windows with soft sighs. Wyatt stepped out of his bedroom barefoot, the floorboards creaking under his weight. Something had pulled him from sleep, not noise, not fear, just a feeling, a father's instinct. He walked down the hallway, past Sienna's empty room, and paused at the den, where Echo's bed had been set up near the fireplace. The lamp was off. Only moonlight spilled through the window, casting silver shadows across the rug. And there they were. Sienna was curled beside Echo, one arm draped over his chest like a lifeline. Her other hand held the corner of a well-worn blanket that had followed her through every storm of her young life. Her breathing was deep, peaceful. But Echo was awake. His ears twitched as Wyatt approached, but he didn't move, didn't growl, didn't stir. Only lifted his head slightly, just enough for their eyes to meet. There was no sound, no command, no need for words. In the darkness between them, something passed, something steady, certain, a vow. "I'll watch over her, always." Wyatt swallowed hard, the weight of it catching him off guard. He crouched beside them, reached out, and laid a hand gently on Echo's shoulder. "Thank you," he whispered, voice hoarse. Echo didn't respond, but his tail thumped once, slow and deliberate, against the floor. That was enough. Wyatt stood back up, watched his daughter's chest rise and fall in quiet rhythm. Then he turned, heading down the hallway, but this time he left the door open, because tonight there were no more locks needed. There was Echo, and a promise made without a single word spoken. In a world that often speaks too loud, sometimes it's the silent bonds that heal us most. Echo wasn't just a dog, he was a protector, a survivor, a quiet guardian for a little girl who saw past scars and found something worth saving. This story reminds us that second chances aren't just for people. Dogs like Echo, once cast aside, can become something extraordinary when met with patience, love, and belief. German shepherds, with their fierce loyalty and unmatched intelligence, aren't just working dogs. They're family, healers, and silent heroes who carry more than we'll ever fully understand. Sienna and Echo found each other in their brokenness. And in doing so, they showed us that love doesn't need words. It needs presence. It needs trust. If this story moved you, consider opening your heart, or even your home, to a rescue animal. Sometimes, the ones with the deepest wounds give the greatest gifts, because every echo deserves a second chance, and every child deserves a guardian who never leaves their side.